Hello, everyone. It is so nice to be here with you today. I'm going to go ahead and go around and do some introductions. Of course, my name is Zach Rochelle. I'm the host here. Let's go on over to Marcy. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Not at all. Hi, Zach and Diane and Stephanie. My name is Marcy Stein. I'm an emeritus professor, special education, and author of one of the authors. I'm here with the co-author of the Direct Instruction Mathematics textbook. And previously, I've worked for follow through in universities and school districts and helped people to decide what curriculum to use. And those are my interests.
And Marcy and I, of course, have collaborated on a lot of things, including some projects I don't know if we revealed during this episode. Stephanie, another one of my big collaborators. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Zach. I'm Stephanie Stollar. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I am an educational consultant. I have supported schools and districts to improve reading outcomes by implementing multi-tiered systems of support for quite a long time. I am the author of a book coming out in May 2025, published by Solution Tree called MTSS for Reading Improvement. And I support teacher educators to use the science of reading in their teacher preparation courses.
Awesome. And Diane, you've just flown back from Mexico, and so you're sort of still getting your bearings. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Diane Kinder. I was a professor with Marcy at the University of Washington for, we figured out, 19 years together. Before that, I started a DI undergraduate teaching preparation program at Northern Illinois University, and for many years, a DI public school teacher in both regular ed and special ed.
Love it. And so it is so great to have all three of you here. We're going to be talking about your areas of expertise and something that's just been talked about a lot. And I know, Stephanie, we've kind of gone back and forth about this in the past, is sort of an understanding of what MTSS really entails. That's your upcoming book, which I'm super excited about sharing with people. Let's start with this, kind of to get us a baseline of knowledge. What is MTSS? Is it different than RTI? And why is it important that educators know about it?
Yeah, to me, MTSS is broader than the way that RTI was conceptualized, because RTI, frankly, became just a process of moving students through a series of interventions. And in many places, that just was about the route to special education, rather than using an IQ achievement test discrepancy formula, using how students responded to instruction and intervention to make decisions about special ed eligibility. But to me, MTSS is a broader school improvement framework. It's about teams using data to engineer a system of evidence-based instruction and intervention that fits the context of the school and causes every student to reach their academic and behavioral goals. So it's really a systems change approach. And for me right now, it's a bridge between what people are talking about as the science of reading and the reality of their schools. Because sometimes people think, well, MTSS is just the ideal state. It's something we can never achieve. We can never get all of our students to be skilled readers. And that's actually not the case. We know from research that we can get just about every single student to be a skilled reader, but we have to take into consideration what our students need and the reality of our school systems, what our resources are at the local level and what our challenges are, and bring those things together to benefit students.
I love that description. I'm going to ask a few probing questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of the things I hear a lot is with MTSS is you said already, it's this idealized state that we can maybe never reach. The other one I really hear is that we're doing it. You go into the school and you realize like some of the inflexible kind of structures that are in place in kind of the conventional or traditional model of a school, those are really preventing any of the levers being pulled to do anything that remotely looks like MTSS. I mean, are you seeing some of those same things as you work with schools?
Absolutely. People think it's like some rigid set of practices that should be consistent and the same across every single school. And I don't really see it that way. I think the piece that's central and essential to implementing MTSS is that educators get together and they use data to make decisions, and they are building the structures that students need. What often happens in schools, and I think what you're describing, Zach, is that we have a way of doing business and then we sort of try to shove students into it. And it will work for some. And if it doesn't work for others, well, then you must be special. You must need something different. And we're going to put you over here and do something different with you. Instead of taking a good long look at who are our students, what do they need? What is the right way for us to organize ourselves? How should we be doing business? How should we be grouping our students? How should we be organizing ourselves as adult resources? What kind of instruction? What are the topics of instruction? What are the instructional methods and approaches that we should be using? How do we make decisions about who needs more intensive support? All of those things are open for conversation in an MTSS approach. Rather than having a rigid system that students have to fit into, we should be talking about building the system that our students actually need.
I love that. And so here's where I think we should invite the rest of our panel here today, which is to think about how direct instruction interfaces or interacts with MTSS, because it's been around for a while. And I can imagine if you're considering different options for your school that might be a question that comes up. I'd like to go over to you, Marcy. Like, how do you see direct instruction fitting into this system that Stephanie was just describing?
Hopefully your listeners know a little bit about direct instruction, but direct instruction with a capital D and capital I is an approach to instruction that is the characteristics of direct instruction involve how you interact with students, the curriculum materials that you use, and how you monitor their progress and how you make decisions about moving through that curriculum. I mean, it has all of the components of an instructional approach, and MTSS enhances what we do with direct instruction. So we have an approach to instruction. We place kids carefully. We have placement tests. We place kids carefully in instructional materials. We monitor their progress, and we use various levels of assessment to monitor their progress, and including sort of assessments that are independent of the program. There are in-program assessments, and then there are assessments that are outside of the program. And all of the assessments help us make decisions about whether or not kids are succeeding, and what we, if they're not succeeding, what we as educators need to do about that. So it's a great marriage. I mean, there is nothing in an MTSS system that fights or contradicts what we do when we use a direct instruction approach.
And in fact, I feel like, especially when we go back to Project Follow Through and we go to some of the best implementations, that kind of comprehensive whole school approach is really like the ethos behind direct instruction. Am I right about that? Maybe Diane, I'm curious of your thoughts on this.
Well, I think you're definitely correct. And I think one of the things that Marcy was talking about with these multiple measures of reading in particular. So DI programs have in-program tests, and they have a number of ones that are frequent, and then there are at various intervals. And I think the important thing goes back to with those tests and with MTSS goes back to something Stephanie said. The first thing that DI programs have you look at is if you see some patterns of errors in students' reading, what do I need to change as an instructor? What am I not doing as well as I should? So that may not be quite on point with your question, but I think it shows how these systems fit together, that the first thing we look at is not the kid and what's wrong with the kid, and let's send this kid someplace else because something's not working well. The first thing we look at is our instruction.
Absolutely. And Marcy, you go ahead. I can see you raising your hand.
Well, I wanted to say something about follow through here because I think it's really important. In the early days of follow through, the designers of the direct instruction model, right, our direct instruction model for follow through, embedded in that direct instruction model was a system of monitoring progress. In fact, Every site had what they called then testers. And testers were paraeducators who, at certain lesson intervals, tested all the kids on sort of a criterion reference test, on a mastery test. These are in we're talking about the 60s here. We're talking about the early 60s. So there was information going back to the teachers, to the administrators, to the consultants, all about kids' progress from the very beginning of the direct instruction model. And then it became more sophisticated. And then we understood how to use other forms of assessment. We understood how to use information to make decisions. But that was embedded in the direct instruction model from the very start. And that information was critical. And the information looked at, it was kind of funny, interesting in that the information was, are the kids performing well? And the testers would kind of put at these little 10 lesson intervals, pluses or minuses, and you could figure out whether all the kids in the group missed the specific skill, which then goes back to, is there a teacher issue here that the teacher needs some consulting or some coaching in how to teach that skill? Or are there kids that stand out that are missing things? You could get some information from these very cursory, early mastery tests that weren't even called mastery tests at the time, I don't think. But so a system of assessment and making decisions based on kid performance was embedded in the direct instruction model from day one.
There really are so many areas of overlap that what I think about as far as the core components and essential elements of MTSS, they're sort of baked into DI. This idea of a school-wide approach, the idea of targeting skills, grouping students, accelerating their progress, intensifying the support as needed, using flexible service delivery, sort of an all hands on deck approach to training and delivering instruction to students, bringing students to mastery, and that the responsibility is of the adults in that environment. It's not a deficit model. It's the job of the adults in the school to make sure that every student is successful. And all of those sort of underlying belief systems are common across DI implementation and MTSS as I know it.
I want to say something about that because I absolutely agree. But I can imagine, and this has come up so many times, but we just have to address it. Can imagine from what I've heard from people saying that they see the structure of these programs and they see the scripts and they think you can't if you have to follow the script, you're not being flexible, you're not responsive to student performance because you're just sort of going through the script. And that's not how my training worked, and that's not how you use the materials. But maybe Diane, like, how do you address this if you've ever encountered? I'm sure you have. If you've ever encountered that kind of argument against using structured programs like DI.
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think people do feel like the teacher is locked in and lacks creativity, and all of the teacher's intelligence is kind of offended because it's a script. And I see it as just the opposite. A really good DI teacher, every single student response is a piece of data. And that piece of data is something that teachers need to evaluate immediately. What do I do with that piece of data? Marcy talked about consistent errors, and I know that's pretty much related to a specific teacher. I'll give an example. In the Pacific Northwest, a short I and a short E sound almost the same. And that's something that we really have to look out for. I think another aspect that related to DI and the scripts that many people don't realize, and again, this goes back to that marriage between measurement and direct instruction, is some people think that DI will hold back the gifted kids, the kids that can go faster, those kinds of things. And again, that marriage allows us to see, as Marcy talked about with the frequent assessment, kids that are just nailing everything. And really, it's like, whew, you don't need to be in my group. You know everything. Let's move you faster. As opposed to the kids that, oh, I need to do a little more reteaching. And the DI programs will tell you if they're having trouble discriminating E&I. Here's some reteaching that I need to do. It's not just more practice, which is one of the things that people think DI is. It's that careful organization of curriculum so that you can identify the specific things and reteach those. And I think Marcy and I have like half a brain together. We have a whole brain. We talk about
Thanks,
that. And I think she has something to say as well about that, your question.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. I think a long time ago, I heard Engelman say that when you teach a DI lesson with the script, it's like a chess game. The script allows a teacher to focus on the kids, completely focus on the kids. The teacher doesn't have to think about what the next example is going to be. The teacher doesn't have to think about language. Did I explain this differently yesterday than I did today? The scripts are just reflections of a really well-designed program, and sitting in front of a group of kids and teaching a group of kids, I am watching and listening and monitoring, and I'm trying to predict whether or not an error that was made previously is going to be made again. And what can I do to prevent that error from being made again? And how do I bring a group of kids, all these kids, to mastery so that we can move on? And that whole notion, and Stephanie and I have talked about this a lot, this whole notion of bringing kids to mastery before you move on is critical in a DI program. And if you don't do that, then and Diane and I talk about this all the time. You go in as a consultant, you watch a group, you see that the kids are haven't mastered the material, that they're a little bit fragile, that they make frequent errors, and we have to say, you're going to have to move back X number of lessons and reteach these, because the direct instruction is based on a mastery model. It's seductive. Direct instruction is seductive in that there is so much repetition, right? And you do practice skills over and over again that you think, oh, I don't have to bring kids to mastery today because they're going to see it again tomorrow. And that is the greatest fallacy about implementing a direct instruction program. If you wait for the next day to bring kids to mastery, or you wait for the next task that would, and you let the kids make errors, and you accept a kind of a lower level, you will not get performance out of the kids. So when you're teaching, you are focused on those kids. You are watching. You are making sure that when you use group responding, the kids aren't leading. You are using your individual turns really strategically to check to see whether or not the kids have it or they don't have it. All your attention is there. It is much harder to teach a direct instruction program that is scripted than a program that is not scripted, than a program that just kind of asks kids questions and you move on. It is because of the assumption of mastery before you move on. So it's just a myth that, one, it's easier to teach, or two, it's boring, or two, what it does is allow us to so focus on the kids. Okay, I'm done with that.
I love that. And there are teachers that are listening to this that are practitioners that use the materials. And I have to say, like, I skipped things my first time around that were literally in the script. Like, there were correction procedures. It said repeat until firm, right? And at the very beginning of each book, there is a teacher's guide that explains delayed tests and all these other things. And I just didn't know enough to do it. And then once I learned it, and then once I had it modeled to me, you should go back and listen to the episode with Tamara Bressi, where she models, and I actually get a little bit vulnerable and teach part of a lesson. If you're listening, if you want to hear that, it's a previous episode. But there is an element that the script and the training and the teacher's guide all respond to some of these questions.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And consulting and working with people who have done this program before, because it is so different from everything else that teachers have been introduced to. Usually it's so to have a script, to have the specific language and kind of weird, funny language, to even use group responding. In order for group responding to be valuable, you give a signal, because if you don't give a signal for kids to respond together, then you will get some kid who kind of goes a little faster. And then that negates every other kid's response in the group, because all they did was listen to that first response and respond. So the implementation of it of direct instruction, using the scripts and using the program, it's much more sophisticated than it appears to be if you're just observing it, or if it's amazing how different it can be from what people assume when they observe it.
Stephanie, one of the things that we've talked about in the past through your Reading Science Academy, which I really recommend people go check out, it's an awesome, awesome community of people learning about the science of reading, is how behavior interacts with methods like direct instruction and how MTSS involves a component of behavior. Maybe you could speak to how these are sort of how these interact to kind of, how success breeds success and so on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of aspects to that. I think there's a lot of engagement within a DI lesson. So lots of opportunities to respond, lots of routines that help students know how to predict what's coming next and frees up their cognitive desk space to focus on what they're learning and not have to think about, on this prompt, am I supposed to say something or am I supposed to gesture? Or, the routines are so valuable in that way in terms of managing the behaviors within the instructional environment so that students can focus on learning. And that frees up the teacher, I think, also to focus on the learning by having those behavioral routines. In terms of big picture connections, the relationship between reading and behavior is well established. This is, why people often visualize and depict MTSS as having two parts to that triangle or cone, as I like to depict it, because all of your efforts around positive behavior intervention and supports will positively impact academic outcomes, reading, at the forefront of that. And if you want to improve the behavioral and social outcomes of your students, teach them to read, right? So these are reciprocal efforts within a school, which is why MTSS is so often implemented in an integrated model. Yes, schools might start with focusing first on behavior or school-wide behavioral supports, or they might focus on an academic area like reading first, but it comes back around to work on the other aspect at some point in time. And the structures that facilitate that are the same. So you have teams at all levels of the system, district level, school level, grade level, and student level. You have data sources that inform student outcomes in terms of behavior or academics. You have processes, database decision-making, processes for using the data. You have evidence-based tiered systems of instruction and intervention, whether you're talking about reading or behavior. So, in the big picture, it's a comprehensive school-wide model that involves both behavioral outcomes and academic outcomes like reading.
I love that. I feel like this next question that it's going to go over to Marcy and Diane is going to talk about maybe a concrete example of this in place. So I've heard a lot from Marcy about Project RTI, and that started at the University of Washington, Tacoma. And I kind of want to see how you describe this kind of as a model for how to partner with schools and how to get them to think in these ways and integrate these systems. Maybe Marcy, we'll start with you. Kind of what was Project RTI?
Project RTI was the name of a grant that Diane and I were co-directors of. And we wrote this grant. We had the opportunity to write this grant to the federal government. And it was a grant to revise our dual track program, our general ed, special ed program. So teachers got a general ed certificate and they got a special ed endorsement. And this was how would we look at our program and revise it? And we were given funding to do that. One of the key parts of teacher preparation that both Diane and I think are incredibly key is how do you coordinate, how do you integrate all the field experiences with the coursework that teachers provide. My entire career, that was an issue, right? It was kind of, I'm going to teach a class on reading. I'm going to teach you about what good reading instruction looks like, what evidence-based instruction looks like, and then I have to put you into a classroom where they're not using evidence-based instruction. And I had very little control over that. We were in schools, here are the schools who would take us. Here's a classroom. And I actually had to say it when I first started, and I wasn't doing the supervision of the students in their field placements. In my reading class, I had to say, don't tell me where you are. You can give me some examples, but I don't want to know who the teachers are. Don't tell me, anything about it. And students would come and say, there's this huge discrepancy between what you're teaching us and what we're seeing in schools. And it was a huge challenge to be able to address that when I wanted to. And we were all, Diane and I, from this minute we started working together, we're committed to teaching our teachers about evidence-based practices. So we get an opportunity to do this grant. And we say, here are the things that we applied to the grant, here are the things that we're going to change. And one of the things we're changing is our residency, our partnership with schools. And we designed a partnership where we went to schools, we invited schools to apply to become partners with us. Schools want our teachers, right? Schools want student teachers. They want help. They want extra help. The problem is that on our end is placing students into schools that are not successful, using practices that we don't endorse. So we got a chance because of this project. It was called RTI because it was before MTSS was created, right? The RTI sort of evolved into MTSS, and it was called Project RTI because that was the nomenclature at the time. So we said we're going to work with schools involved in RTI who have a commitment to using student data to make decisions, using teams. And we are going to invite schools to apply. And we had an application process. And then we went to the schools, and the key was being on the same page. The schools wanted us. They understood what we taught. We wanted our students in those schools because we could then demonstrate, here are successful schools. We're going to put students into successful schools and show them what makes a successful school. And we went to the schools. We did get a vote. One of our consultants kind of recommended that we present this partnership to the school, to the teachers and the principal, and say, when you take our teachers, you're taking on new responsibility. It's more work for you. So we need to know that you want to do this. They passed the first step with the application. They are doing RTI. They're committed to RTI. They actually don't hate direct instruction. They have some direct instruction in their schools. So we were able to be selective, and the teachers voted in an 80% vote that yes, we're ready to commit to you. And so Project RTI was this redesigning of a teacher preparation program with a very strong partnership with the schools that enabled us, and Diane brought this up in an earlier conversation, that promoted coherence between what university courses taught and what you saw in the schools.
I love that. Maybe Diane, you could speak to what were some of the concrete kind of actions that you took? Like what did you experience as a pre-service teacher that was involved in this kind of program? And what did the schools experience as part of this partnership?
Sure, I can talk about that. And I also want to say before we go further that Marcy and my background and our kind of moral commitment was to low income school districts that were diverse, school districts that had a high population of English language learners. That just came from us and our background, our teaching, from all of those things. So that was another critical piece that we were looking for in school districts that we partnered with. At least one of our school districts was district-wide title because of the low income across the whole district. So that was one of the things we were looking for. And Marcy used the word coherence. And I think coherence was a critical feature not only for our placements, so between our field placements and the university, but also at the university between classes. And that's something that also is frequently missed. But we had a pretty coherent program across both of those areas. I think in terms of kind of nuts and bolts and working with school districts. It took us a while, but by the time we had the grant, we realized that measurement actually was what needed to come first, and our students needed to learn about how you measure students' progress, kids' progress, both formal measures as well as those within program and MTSS. And so that was something in the summer before students were placed in the schools that they learned about at the university. And I taught that class. And because of our partnership, again, they learned about the general principles of multi-tiered systems of support, but we knew which particular formats the districts use. And our district used one particular product, so we could actually use those measures and train on campus. And then because of our partnership, one of our districts ran a rather large reading summer school. And by the end of summer school, they needed to measure those students' progress, as well as the frequent measures that went on during summer school. So who did they partner with to do that? Well, our students from the university became the testers, the testing team. And one of the outstanding vice principals organized that for us and prepped the students and our university students. So that was their first experience with kids, which was in the summer before they even started their placement. And Marcy referred to their residency. They were in the same school for a whole year. And that's part of why so many of our student teachers were hired, is because they did a whole year tryout in this school district. And so they had, again, the measurement class first. Well, the measurement and multi-tiered systems of support talk about how to measure reading, how to measure math, how to measure writing. And as our students went through the quarters of their instruction on campus, they had a scientifically based direct instruction reading course. And they're going, aha, this looks a lot like some of those things we measured last summer and some of the things that we're now seeing in our classrooms, which of course, that's what we would want. We don't want the exact opposite that Marcy talked about. Just kind of as an aside, this gave the two of us, Marcy and I, some real street credibility, because all of a sudden they saw us with kids. They saw us in schools. So it wasn't like, well, they're the ivory tower people. They don't really know about kids. My teacher does it this way, and so that must be right. Well, all of a sudden we had street credibility. The master teachers would, when we went into classrooms, and that was another aspect, we would visit our students in their classrooms, would say, I've got some kids that are having trouble with math facts. Do you have any suggestions? And well, guess what? We do. So there was that coherence with the school placements, but a coherence between classes, the measurement, the way that their reading methods, their math methods, their language arts methods approach things with this idea of instructional design, and looking at the students didn't necessarily have direct instruction math programs or direct instruction writing programs, but looking at the instruction and looking at their teaching as how it implemented that. So I think that those are really important. I think another aspect that we really need to mention is, I said a year long in the schools, a year of teaching direct instruction, and Zach talked about the first time he taught DI. And I remember skipping things. I remember looking at something and going, why would you do that? That's silly. And then 20 lessons later going, oops. So our students had a year of very careful feedback as they taught. They were observed by a very high quality direct instruction teacher, supervisor, if you will, who would observe them at least weekly. We had a system of observing that allowed us to give feedback very similar to the kinds of feedback that multi-tiered systems of support use. So that there were things that we observe in an initial teacher, and then as they become more sophisticated, and finally a rather long list of things we expected to see. So Stephanie didn't discuss this, but one of the things I love is graphing data and having those charts with all your students and the skills, and have they mastered it? Is it green? Are they working on it? Is it yellow? Is it red? And so our student teachers would receive only their particular chart week by week, showing that in all of these different areas of teaching, they were moving towards more and more green. And I'll always remember one of our students that said, I am going to be all green next week, so that they really understood this multi-tiered system of support, the kind of support that they were giving their students. They realized that we were giving it to them as well. And that was really important for us to kind of practice what we teach in a number of different ways.
I think that's the key. I had the opportunity to partner with Diane and Marcy in a little project to try to bring direct instruction to teacher prep a while back. And, I think we might have been ahead of our time a little bit in that project, because there's such a chasm between the way that many teacher educators were trained and practiced themselves in a much more constructivist approach, minimally guided instruction. And so that's what they know, and that's what they transmit to their teacher candidates. But what Diane's pointing out is this beautiful partnership with schools where there was a parallel between what the teacher candidates were being taught and what they were experiencing in schools and the way they were being taught by Marcy and Diane. And that's the real goal, I think, that we need to get towards, that it's not just the content of teacher preparation that we need to be tweaking and changing. It's how the teacher educators are delivering that content, how the professors are designing the curriculum and getting their students to mastery and using assessments, all the things that Diane just mentioned. That's what we have to elevate and find a way to prepare teacher educators to be able to do. So I'm not sure how to do that, but that's the goal.
I want to add another thing about the partnership that was important. Once we sort of set up a kind of an application, and Diane and I had been in the area for a while, and we'd been teaching for a while, and so we did know our surrounding districts, and we did know people who were teaching. The first year of the grant was sitting down with representatives from the schools, instructional coaches, principals, some teachers, and designing the program. We designed the program. We designed what sequence of courses did we want? What did the field experience need to look like in the fall? How could we build that coherence even more? We designed it with our knowing what we know, knowing that this is what our coursework looks like and this is what we're teaching, but we designed it in conjunction with our school partners. What should we teach first? In fact, I think maybe moving the assessment course to the summer, Diane, might have come about because of that partnership. And it was very important that this was collaborative. In fact, we tried to add something to year two. The year one of the program was you get your certificate, you start in the summer, you end in the summer, you get a certificate, and then year two was you get hired, but you continue to work on your master's degree. You can finish a master's degree, but you're certified and you're endorsed. And if you want that master's degree, which most people did for salary reasons, you would do it in the second year. The first thing that we did was we said, oh, we'll add some more coursework to the second year. It won't be all the coursework, but we'll have your master's project that you have to do, and then in your seminar, and then we'll add another little course and then the school people came to us and said, no, first year teachers can't handle it. Nope, take that away, which we did. We would meet with them once a year. It was support for their first year in teaching. So it wasn't finish the first year and then you go away. This was, you're staying for your master's degree, and we are going to help you solve problems also that in this seminar that you've encountered excuse me, as a first year teacher. And I want to qualify one other thing. These were not all direct instruction schools per se. They didn't use direct instruction reading in grades K through 5. They did in special ed and they did in title. So our students could get experiences teaching the direct instruction programs in definitely in special ed and definitely in title in their first seminar in the fall quarter after the class. And when they were taking the reading class, we did require, and we worked with our partners on this, every one of our students to teach a direct instruction reading group, one group. Here's why we wanted to do that. And I can imagine all the arguments. Well, what is that doing? How is that going to prepare somebody to teach when they don't have a direct instruction program? We wanted our students to experience small group teaching and be successful at small groups teaching, integrate the management strategies that you need to learn while you're teaching small group, right? And we also wanted them to experience what a very well-designed systematic program looks like. There are many teachers that go through a teacher preparation program, go into student teaching, go into schools, and never have the experience of teaching out of a well-designed program. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does bringing kids to mastery? What does that feel like? Every one of our students taught a direct instruction program. And that was only for the first quarter. Then they, of course, then when they went to the regular, the other field experiences, they taught out of the programs that were used in the schools, and they weren't always direct instruction programs in general education. So, and then they made modifications and they did what they needed to do. But the myth that you don't learn it, that all you learn is direct instruction when you teach a direct instruction program, I mean, it is a myth. Because when you teach a direct instruction program and you learn how to teach it well and you get coached in teaching it, you learn management skills, you learn what systematic instruction looks like, you learn how to predict errors, you learn all of those delivery and design skills all rolled into one that basically is the application of what we were teaching in the course, in the college course.
And I have a story. I don't know if I ever told you this that totally proves this to me. If there's a doc student who wants to prove that doing a structured program can help you with your teaching, at least with how you think about how you use data, how you deliver, how you use behavior systems. I was doing my explicit instruction song and dance thing, and what you do is you have them script out some instruction and you interleave questions and so on. And a teacher and I always ask for volunteers, and of course adults don't want to ever volunteer to go in front of everyone, but someone did, and she walks up to the board and she draws a T chart and does a teacher student game, and she teaches the thing and she does core response and she goes, "Get ready," and she snaps her fingers and she taught the lesson she'd scripted. And afterwards, I just walked up to her, I was like, "Reading mastery." She's like, "Yep." I just knew it. I just knew it from everything. I swear that what you mentioned, and that going through a program like this does teach you the things that we sort of talk about in the abstract when it comes to good, explicit, direct teaching. Um,
Zach,
yeah.
may I add a little bit to what Marcy said about how we designed Project RTI in cooperation with the school districts? Certainly they were involved initially, but that was ongoing. And this was another aspect, again, that Stephanie talks about, practicing what we teach. And that was that we would have regular feedback, I'll call them assessments, surveys from our schools, from the reading coaches in the schools, from the principals, whoever was most directly involved with our students. We would also have meetings on campus, and we would look at what is going well, what we need to improve, how we can change. We'd make those changes, try them out, and see if in fact that was an improvement. So again, we're practicing what we teach. We did that not only with the teacher preparation students that were in the program, but we followed them. So their first year teaching, we surveyed their principals and got what we were doing well, what we need in terms of how well the student teacher was prepared, how well prepared in the area of reading. Oh, imagine that. They were very well prepared. How well were they prepared in social studies, in teaching science, those kinds of things? And that was super helpful. And we had so much data regarding our program. When it came time for accreditation at the university level, we were stars before we even started because we had so much, again, evidence, so much data. I'm not sure our principals also were volunteering to come in and talk about our program and be interviewed in accreditation program interviews because they knew how well we worked with them and they knew the data. So again, another little aspect of that assessment or measurement that is totally integrated throughout the whole RTI program, that project that we had at the University of Washington, Tacoma.
That's just awesome. We're getting towards the end of our discussion. It's just been a joy. We've kind of talked about MTSS and what it is, and we've talked about how DI fits into that, and looking at the school, like sort of a model for school partnerships, which Marcy, I know you're retired. Diane, are you still in the game?
No, I'm retired.
Diane's retired. She's in Mexico for a huge part of her life. And sort of what I'm trying to explore now is how can direct instruction be integrated into the future of teacher preparation programs? Because my experience in on the general ed side was completely the was completely the opposite of what you're describing here. Very little coherence, a smattering of different courses. It kind of felt like getting the first 2 years of a bachelor's program in a lot of ways, just sort of taking a little of this and a little of that, and then they throw you in a school and you just have to make stuff up when you get there. I'm curious, maybe Stephanie, what are your thoughts in terms of this question?
Well, I know there are several states now that have statewide efforts to align teacher preparation, pre-service teacher preparation specifically, with the science of reading. And I would encourage states that are involved in those efforts to engage in this conversation and to take this big picture approach, to not just have a random set of topics that you are now swapping out from your balanced literacy content to now evidence-based content, but to train your teacher candidates in the Cadillac version of instruction, which is DI, and to contextualize that within an MTSS framework so that it is not just seen as individual students being screened and then put into intervention, but a more systemic approach. So if we could start there, if we could start with the state efforts, recognizing that there's a bigger picture view to this, and to use the direct instruction programs and model as an exemplar of how this can happen, how you can facilitate the field work and the cohesive preparation of teachers. That's one approach and one idea.
And we are going to, funny that you should ask this, Zach, that there is a conference. There's always there's a direct instruction conference every summer in Eugene, Oregon, and it's put on by the National Institute for Direct Instruction, NIFTY. And this year we are going to offer an institute for higher ed to address the issues of how would you integrate direct instruction into your teacher prep. We hope that people will attend. We will be very practical. Diane and I are both presenting in this institute, and we will talk about ways that universities and schools can work, or districts can work together. If teams of people could come, that would be lovely, right? The ideal, the dream would be for some higher ed people to come with some school district people together and talk about how would design this, right? But if not, we understand the constraints. We like we said, this wasn't. Our schools did not just use direct instruction. In our ideal world, they would have, right? But they didn't. And so we did workarounds, right? Without compromising too much of what we needed to do for teacher prep. But we were able to within the MTSS framework, within in a direct instruction approach. So we encourage people to come. I mean, it's you can go to the Nifty website, and also we have some resources. I have Diane and I wrote a chapter about this project in a book that is a book with chapters of all the projects that were funded by this particular grant initiative. So we can post the chapter if anybody wants to see the chapter. And I think we have a couple of videos that we can actually videos about how we did coaching and on-site, in-class coaching and things like that. But we hope people come. There are ways to do this, and it's worth doing. And I know it's hard. We know that it's a challenge. We know that it requires a lot of commitment. But getting schools and universities on the same page, and then getting them together, it has to benefit kids.
And Diane, I think I'm going to give you the last word of the podcast.
Well, I just went, woo, that's asking a lot. But I think the important thing is, and I think the exciting thing, as a direct instruction teacher of children, the most exciting thing is to see them learn. I think as a designer of a teacher preparation program, the most exciting thing was to see the growth in those teachers and to hear then from their principals a year later or in the beginning of their first year teaching saying, this is an amazing teacher. This teacher is starting as a first year teacher, looking like a second or third year teacher. That's the kind of thing that kept us going. Just as when you're a DI teacher and you're teaching reading and the kids sound out their first word and it just sends shivers up your back because you realize they're reading and they realize they're reading. Well, we had that same kind of response when we saw the success of our students, our student teachers.
I love that. And with that, we're going to close out. We mentioned a few things that I will put in the show notes for you to take a look at. We mentioned the Nifty conference, which I will also be attending, and I'm going to be bringing this microphone around and doing some interviews with people there. Definitely love to see you in Eugene. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Take care.